Thanks, John. So hi, everyone. My name is Meurig Gallagher. I'm a research fellow at the SMQB. So this project, as John's just introduced, is about anti-thyroid therapy. We're going to talk a bit about the science behind it as we go on. And then really we're going to be looking at Vicky Roden's artwork as we go through, which has been a really important, really interesting part of this project. So we're not the only two people in the team. This is also in collaboration with Professor David Smith, who's an applied mathematician at the University of Birmingham, and Zaki Hassan Smith, who's a consultant at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So he's a hormone specialist working in the area of the thyroid. So when we say the thyroid, what are we talking about? Well, the thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland in your neck. You can see it on the right-hand side, this little sketch. And the thyroid produces hormones, and these hormones go all around the body, and they're really necessary for all the cells within your body and all the processes to work normally. However, these thyroids can often be produced in too great quantity, in which case we say that a person would have an overactive thyroid. They're overexpressing these thyroid hormones. And around 1 million people in the UK have an overactive thyroid. So this is what we would call hyperthyroidism. And if you're producing too many of these thyroid hormones and these levels are not controlled effectively, they can have some really serious effects on your body. So why do these thyroid hormones matter? What are they doing? What problems can they exhibit? Well, if we have too many of these hormones, we can have some quite serious effects, and it can cause conditions such as heart failure and osteoporosis. Osteoporosis being the weakening of your bones that can have lots of problems leading to things like fracture or instability, fragility of your bones. And hypothyroidism really can have a lot of effects on your kind of day-to-day, your quality of life. So people that have hypothyroidism may really struggle to sleep well. They might have low energy, maybe tremors in their hands, heart palpitations. And they will also have this really heightened sense of this flight or fight response that Danny was talking about earlier, because of the impact that these hormones can have on your central nervous system. So one thing we really want to do is treat hypothyroidism. We want to bring down the levels of these hormones that are being produced. And the idea is that doctors will do that by prescribing some medication, but actually getting the right level of medication that allows us to bring this overcreation of hormones under control can take a long time. It can take many visits where patients have to come back and forth every 3 months to visit their doctor. And this has, obviously a big burden on the individual, and it also has health economic costs on the NHS as a system. So this is where we come in and where we can really try and do something about this. So our grand idea is to use mathematical modeling of the thyroid system with clinical data that we're getting in collaboration with Zaki in the clinic at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and aiming to develop a tool for predicting the best dosage of these drugs. So when I say the thyroid system, what I'm really talking about is this sketch we have on the right. So there are two glands in your brain called the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So they release chemical messengers that stimulate the thyroid. The thyroid then releases all these hormones that we've been talking about, and those hormones go around the body. They can really have an effect on your bones, but they also kind of come back into the brain and will have an effect on these two glands. So we have this kind of cyclical nature of what's going on. So our plan is to really use maths to understand what are the patterns in this system. What things can we pull out that you can't just get from looking at clinical data, you can't get from just talking to people? How can we really get to the underlying structure of what's going on? And the really nice thing about this collaboration between the science and Vicky's artwork is that Vicky has got experience of having hypothyroidism herself. So she's really been exploring the impact that thyroid disease can have on the individual. And that's really been driving us to put people at the heart of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to plan with our modeling. So our long-term aim is to really develop ways in which people can take control of their own condition, thinking about using technology such as an Apple Watch or a Fitbit to allow people to monitor what's going on in between these visits while they're trying to get their dosage right. So with that, we'll move on to Vicky, who's going to talk about the work that she's been doing.
Hello everybody. So as Meurig said, I have lived experience of overactive thyroid. Could you move the slide on? So basically, I was diagnosed when I was 20, and I had probably been overactive for a number of years before then. I don't remember a point where I didn't suffer from anxiety. So as discussed, a lot of my input was kind of in that lived experience and in those areas that I knew I wasn't quite right, but because I'd not been tested, I'd not been diagnosed, and it took a long time after I was tested for my diagnosis to be made official. And I was originally diagnosed with anxiety and growing pains and teenage stress. I actually ended up seeing a therapist when I was 16, whereas it was actually a little gland that I had no idea even existed that was causing the issue. I very much, when I start projects, I very much focus on things like the origins of words and so on. And the name of the gland actually comes from the shape of a Greek shield. And so I did some initial experiments around that shape. So on the left of the screen, you can see experiments I did using resin and gold leaf. To replicate the shape of the thyroid. And on the right, that's kind of a representation of the medication I was on for quite a while. And they were these tiny little kind of slightly pink tablets that were very sweet, and they coated the inside of the bottle in this kind of dust. So that's recreation of the shape of the traditional thyroid shape in basically sugar paste. Next slide. Part of the shape experiments, I do a lot of embroidery as part of my practice, and I kind of wanted to represent the thyroid with its nodules and so on. With it being referred to by the name of a Greek shield, it kind of reminded me of a line in the telly show Rome, where Julius Caesar's epilepsy is referred to as the curse of Apollo. And I kind of felt that this disease that does disproportionately affect women and does absolutely ramp up your fight or flight mechanism, so you're constantly on edge waiting for a battle that never comes. It very much felt like the curse of Athena, because she does seem like the kind of vengeful goddess who would actually make somebody feel like that for her own amusement. So this was a piece of embroidery using bone beads, gold thread on satin and satin thread that kind of represented that that and explored that shape a little further. Next slide. So another area that I was interested in was traditional cures. There are no homeopathic remedies for hypothyroidism. I actually, the only one I could find was wearing an amulet made of the skin of a hanged man about the neck. Relaying that information actually got me kicked off a Facebook thyroid support group, so be careful who you share that with. But one of the things that I found was common Cromwell, and earlier I did the casts in resin, and I really like the idea of using the leaves or the flowers of this plant as part of the eventual piece of work. So you can see the various stages from the being sewn in an egg box and kept in the fridge, to the initial sprouting, to the flowering, and then the little seeds, the straggly plant it becomes, and then you can see how it was eventually used in the casting. Next slide. Something else that was interesting was all the discussions that we had. I'd never had a chance to talk to an expert about my condition, and even at the time that I was ill, even if I had have had the opportunity to sit down with someone like Zaki and actually really discuss the condition, I wouldn't even have known what questions to ask. And I made some questionable life choices and so on. But the COVID crisis and how I've handled that reminded me of the second Gulf War and how I handled that absolutely terribly. I basically was living in a second floor flat, and I made a bunker in the laundry room, and I'd convinced myself in the 15 minutes morning I'd be able to nip across the shop on top of the electric and all that. It was quite delusional, but having worked on this project and knowing about the effects it has, I've kind of realized that I couldn't have done anything differently at all. I wasn't in a position to be more together. And this photograph is one of very few photographs I have of myself from that time. But I'm a lot kinder to the person I was back then, rather than thinking myself as being weak. I actually see how well I coped given the circumstances. Next slide. So back to the final work. The treatment of thyroid, it's a combination of the expertise of your doctor and a variety of factors like how well you respond to the medication, the effects that you get, how bad you are at the start. So it felt like a combination between chess and a game of dice. And so I wanted to develop a game that was a combination of those elements. So you had the elements of choice that made it skillful and the elements of chance that could completely blow you out of the water. So these figures are game pieces that are cast in resin. The center one actually has a herb suspended in her. And then if we could go to the next slide. So I then was working on a game board, and again I wanted to keep this Greek shield shape. So the black and white drawn one was my initial sketch, and then the other one was my first prototype of the eventual resin game board. So you can see the pieces on there and the Cromwell leaves in the center. And next one. And so here you have the final game board. Unfortunately, an image hasn't saved on the file, but the rotating one, that's a 3D model of the eventual piece of work. And so there's Cromwell leaves and metal strips, and essentially you throw dice to get a number, and we can move on to the next slide. So you throw the dice to get a target, and then you throw 2 dice, and it's a product of that throw that then gets you closer to the target. So the skill element is in choosing the right 2 dice to actually get you within the parameters of your target. But the luck element is in the fact that those dice can show any number from between 1 to 100. Basically, you've got a D4 and a D100, so you can have theoretically a throw of up to 400, or you could have a D4 with the D6 and get a maximum of 24. And that's the eventual game board. So yeah, looking forward to seeing where this goes, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Vicky. That was, again, fascinating, and just hearing how you thought about this and how you evolved your ideas was incredible, but also hearing how you sort of learned a bit more about yourself and how you were as a result of the project was also really, really fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing your journey with us.